Console Budget Series, a great way for players to get access to the best a console can offer at an affordable price. This offer, however, adds a new cost in a different manner, an alteration to the game's cover. So, for our amusement, I decided to create this simple video, ranking console budget series on a tier list in an effort to find the least offensive of the bunch. But first, some rules for the video. Rule number 1. As specified, this will only cover console series, so no PC games. Rule number 2. Only first-party series, as we're also trying to check visual brand synergy with the console itself, which the console's publisher should be aware of. Rule number 3. Single games only, so no packs or bundles. And lastly, rule number 4. PAL region only, since I have easier access to those. However, I might do other regions on a later occasion. Also, if you don't see a version or series in this video that you might happen to know, please mention it in the comments below and I will try to make an amendment to the video later on. To make the rating easier, I've also devised a point system to score each series using 5 categories. Depending on how well a series does on a category, it will either receive -1, 0 or 1 point, giving us a maximum of 5 points or a minimum of -5 points, with all ranges in between being divided by ranks from S to F, with S being 5 points, C being at the center with 0, and F at the bottom with -5. And these are the categories I've chosen to rate our series. Real estate, how much space the design occupies on the cover, subtracting it from the original cover art. Color, how well the main color of the series design fits with the console's identity, as well as the cover style for that console. Style, how well the visual design of the series held over time, as well as how well it fits with the console's visual style. Communication, how well it communicates to the player the meaning of the series. And finally, spine and context, how well it holds alongside other games of the same console on a shelf. It's okay, it identifies itself as a different series, but it shouldn't stick out like a sore thumb. I hope that clarifies how I'll be rating each series. However, if you thought that was a bit confusing, then jumping to our first design as an example will probably make it more clear. And there is no better place to start than probably one of the most recognizable ones, Sony's Platinum series. A series that started on the original Sony PlayStation in 1997 and ended on the PlayStation 3's midlife point, covering a total of 3 generations of consoles. Looking at the PlayStation 1 Platinum, I think it's fair to say it's a classic. And not by chance, I mean, just starting with real estate, it already gets a +1. It's probably one of the best examples since it occupies mostly the same space as the regular console branding. Speaking of the console branding, the style is pretty good as well, another +1. It's simple and, since it's basically the same as the regular cover, just as effective. The Platinum logo part is nicely tucked away in the PlayStation logo and doesn't visually obstruct anything, but at the same time, still being perceivable. Another thing that helps is the color chosen, +1 again. It fits not only with the regular cover colors, blacks and whites, but also with the console itself. It also gives the box a shine that sells the idea of a premium product, and it's an obvious choice for the series name. When it comes to the name, if one understands the expression of something going platinum, it does give the right idea of what the series represents. A series of games that sold a certain high number of copies. However, if one isn't well familiar with the meaning of the naming, for whatever reason, it might fail in communicating that idea. Because of this, I believe it's fair to give it a 0 regarding communication. Finally, context and spines. Well, it's probably the weakest aspect of this example. While not the worst, its spine is still of a different color. and since the console only has spines of the same color, it is likely to jump out. Good for grabbing the attention of a potential buyer, but possibly OCD inducing when on a house shelf. However, since the regular spines are black, the silverish gray spine doesn't clash that much with them, giving it a 0 as well. Plus, it also helps that the rest of the box remains the same. Not a bad start for Sony on the original PlayStation, with a total of 3 points, putting it at a low A rank. Surely, with such a good base, the other console versions should do just fine, right? Well, not really. The first version of the PlayStation 2 is already an immediate nosedive. And where better to begin than real estate again? Right away, I will say everything that removes a sizable chunk of a cover art immediately gets a -1. So much great cover art obscured by budget series branding. Now, looking at the style itself, it isn't the worst. A simple one, maybe even too simple for the space it occupies. However, it certainly has one of the stupidest things you can find in a budget series. The original console branding inside the series branding. Such an absurd waste of space can only be deserving of another -1. The only things kept from the previous design is the series name, which gives it the same communication score of 0, and the color. Well, kind of, because when we look at the spine, we can see they decided to color it part black, which increases the contrast between it and the regular white spines. So for that change, I have to give it a 0 on this as well. That being said, with such a gigantic contrast between regular and budget spine colors, it should be obvious that when it comes to spine and context, this gets a -1. So the PlayStation 2's first Platinum design gets a total of -3 points. However, there is a slight redesign of this version that merits a closer look. This redesign removes the original brand from the cover, which is already a plus. It also features a larger PlayStation 2 logo that works better in terms of spacing. The centered Platinum moniker also fits better with the centered cover, enough to bump the style to a 0, giving this redesign a total of -2 points, putting the original design in the beginning of E rank and the redesign at the end of D. The PlayStation 2, however, has 2 designs for the Platinum series, so maybe the next one is better? Well, things haven't improved much. Real estate is slightly worse, with even the space of the back cover slightly more occupied by the budget series branding. -1 again. The communication has slightly changed, with emphasis on only the best games reaching Platinum. However, while the Spanish version only says that the best games reach Platinum, other languages on the back say only the best-selling games qualify for Platinum, which is enough clarification to bump the communication score to a +1. In terms of colors, while I'm not a fan of the red screaming at you front and center, putting more emphasis on the black works better with the PS2, and it's more consistent with the spine. This probably warrants a bump in points to +1, but the visual style feels a bit outdated. The simple one from the previous version aged a little bit better, I think. The chrome look of it not only fails at capturing the sleekness of the PlayStation 2, but gives it a tackier look, so it has to be a bump down on this aspect to -1. The spine and context remains the same as the previous version, so that's a -1 here as well, and puts this version at a total score of -1, high D rank. It's just kind of a shame that both versions of a console with such a wide library of games can be such black spots on one's shelf. But before we move on, we can also give the PSP's Platinum the same score, since it is visually identical to the second PS2 version, but with the added factor of a smaller case. On a quick aside, there's also a small variation in a few games that reduces the size of the PSP's logo on the spine, probably created during the update to the console's branding. Going back to the numbered main console releases, we have the first version of the PlayStation. Let's start with the elephant in the room, the new color scheme. The combination of a neon yellow and the series gray is as eye-catching as it is an eyesore. It's not even close to the console's main color scheme. The red used in the previous console version would have made way more sense. -1 point. The new visual style fits the original PS3 console design, but it could have been slightly better implemented with the original cover. For example, not creating a visual separation between the original cover branding and the series color border. Details like this make the design feel tacked on. Besides this, it also doesn't improve the real estate used, warranting a -1 on both these points. In terms of context, the fact that the PS3's cover spine don't all share the same color help it blend on a shelf, especially with it being somewhat neutral colored. 0 points. And it also gets the exact same score in communication as the previous versions, since it maintains all its properties. All in all, the first version of the PlayStation 3 Platinum series gets a total score of -2 points, or low D rank. However, the Platinum series on this console also got a revision. This new version comes alongside a new visual identity for a new console model. It traded the old frontal and spine design for more recognizable ones, closer to the PlayStation 2's design. It also has a stronger visual composition for readability, while at the same time being a good fit for the console's design, giving it a bump to 0 in style. We'll just ignore the exclusivity notice position in the same way as the original cover, occupying even more cover space. However, it also swaps the regular spine logo colors of white on black for that black on yellow eyesore of the series, -1 for context. And since it maintains all the other characteristics of the previous design, it manages to retain the same score of said design, -2, another low D rank. With this, we've reached the end of the Platinum series, a series with a somewhat consistent theme, but that, unfortunately, fails to retain the simplicity of its first design. However, this would not mean the end of budget series on Sony's consoles, as the PS3 era would see a successor to the Platinum series in the form of the Essentials series. I believe it is safe to say that the biggest change comes in the form of a new color scheme. Adorned with a red, white and black combination, the new scheme is much more easy on the eyes than whatever the Platinum series was doing on the PlayStation 3, and a perfect fit for the console itself, +1. The new visual style is as serviceable as the last one, a little less cleaner, but nothing that would deviate it from the same score of 0. It is unfortunate though that it retains the same real estate of -1 points. However, the other big obvious factor that separates both series is the naming of the series, and while the previous one, in a less straightforward way, accurately translated the reality of the series, games that achieve a certain number of sales, or in other words, platinum sellers, the new naming, while more direct, fails to capture the condition of the series, which, unfortunately, makes it a failure in the communication department, warranting it -1 points in this category. Finally, in the context department, the return to the regular spine logo definitely helps it fit better alongside regular games, and even if the red jumps a bit more than the grey-silver color of the Platinum series, I still feel confident in giving it 0 points in this category. Summing all the scores, the Essential series on the PS3, compared to the Platinum series, gets a slightly better score of -1, which puts it at a high D rank, close to C, but not quite there. Alongside the PS3, the Essentials line was also present in the last years of the PlayStation Portable. And I don't even know where to begin with this disaster. The visual style that was put together with the same grace as the baddest of tabloid magazines. The tacky color combination that makes the white colored text unreadable on the spine. The visual chaos created by a combination of both that fail at communicating anything on a store shelf, a garish affront to one's vision on any type of shelf context, coupled together with the same failures of real estate and communication as its relative on the PS3, there is nowhere else to put this atrocity but at the bottom of the list with a total of -5 points. F rank. Let's not waste any more time on sad things. I think we need a palate cleanser. Here we go, much better. The successor to the Essentials line on a newer console, PlayStation 4's PlayStation Hits. Let's start with the name. PlayStation Hits gives the same direct approach as Essentials, but works much better at transmitting the condition of the series, since it can be interpreted as a hit in terms of quality or sales. Strong start with +1. Next, visual style. Not occupying much space gives it a +1 on real estate. It fits well with the regular cover composition and has no problems with readability. It's a bit simpler, but functionally it does its job and doesn't impose itself on the original cover, keeping most of it intact, so a +1 on this category as well. Now, in terms of the color scheme, unfortunately I can't say I'm a big fan of the red on blue. Not only do they not work well together, but the red fails to represent the console's color identity. It will have to be a 0 in this department. On the topic of the red color, it also is the reason why it doesn't get the best grade in terms of context. It is basically the same case of the Essential series on the PS3, so it gets a 0 in this category as well. Still, when all scores are summed up, the PlayStation is back on positive ground with a score of 3, low A rank, right alongside the very first Sony budget series. Not a bad finish for PlayStation, with this series being the last one released on the Sony side of things. Let's hope they have learned from this design if they ever decide to release a new series on the PlayStation 5. Released in 2002 in PAL territories, the original Xbox console could be said to have achieved mild success in European countries. While not as big as in its home country, it still sold enough to warrant a budget series of its own, Xbox Classics. The first iteration of the Classic series can hardly be seen as a hit. However, let's start with the positives. The white and green color scheme works reasonably well with the console's regular color scheme. Using the console's main color with another neutral color tends to be a pretty safe bet. That works here as well, a +1 color scheme. Since the spines of the games don't have a standard look, coming in all types of styles, the Classics version snuggles pretty nicely with other games on the shelf, definitely helped by a color scheme with a soft contrast that fits with the green case itself. Heck, some regular covers even use the same black text on a white background, so another +1. However, enough dilly-dallying. Time to talk about the two big glaring problems. Real estate-wise, do I even have to say it? -1. And the design, while the style itself is alright, it screams early 2000s tech product. But, I mean, the original cover is off-centered, in both the front and back. -1. And yes, I know that this added space was sometimes used for other purposes, but making the cover busier is definitely not a way of making it better. Finally, we've reached the last point, communication. With Classics being a short and easily recognizable term, it makes for a strong name for a series. However, it doesn't translate the requirement correctly, especially being a term more commonly associated with an older object. It would fit better if the games were from a previous console. 0 points. This gives the original Classic series on the original Xbox a grand total score of 0. right in the middle of the table with a C rank. While not as good of a start as the Platinum series, it still was a solid foundation for future versions that would still be seen on the same console with a variation of this same design. This variation comes in the form of the best of. If the added changes of some of the graphics didn't make it look slightly more dated than the original design, then the added big bold red text saying best of on the side space will do so. Plus, changing the classic title to the same red color collectively manages to cement the score of this design as a -1 and bump the color scheme to 0. And while the design on the back manages to slightly increase the actual back cover space, the fact that it's barely noticeable makes this irrelevant to the score. A score that ends up being lower than its original counterpart by -1, putting it on high D rank. Now, on to the 360. At first sight, we can see that Microsoft really likes that open waste of a space on the left, this time with barely readable text for extra flair. Still a -1 on real estate, even if the back now remains unaltered from the regular cover. The style is definitely a time capsule of the original 360 design. Big emphasis on circles and round shapes are the hallmark of the early days of the console. So it is a bit dated, but still easy on the eyes, especially helped by the soft colors, which are composed of colors from the console's visual style. It gives it a cohesiveness with the rest of the cover, helping the style reach a 0 in score, as well as a +1 in color scheme. It gets the same score in communication, a 0, and in terms of spine and context, it has the same advantage of the original Xbox, as there is no visual consistency to the spines. And since the design doesn't change the console branding, it stands out just enough to not look out of place with regular covers, +1 in this category. However, this is the best scenario, because the situation can become aggravated if your copy came with a silver box instead of the regular green one. This inconsistency can be seen across all versions of the series for the 360. Just something to keep in mind. This gives the original Classic's design on the 360 a total of 1 point, placing it in low B rank. Still, this is only the first of 3 versions of the Classic series on the 360. The second version presents us with a slightly louder look, gone are the soft colors, now changed to bolder greens, with a tinge of orange for contrast. While definitely being a different choice from the original design, these colors still fit the console style. +1 to color scheme. The other big obvious change is the visual style. A more simpler look, but with small details like graphics of circular shapes. This, coupled with a smaller border design, not only occupies less cover space, but maintains some of the console's flair. Also, the Classic's title being put alongside the original console branding definitely helps open up space for the original cover. However, I could do without changing the color of the console branding from white to dark green. Still, I think it's solid work, worth of a +1 in design, as well as a +1 in real estate since most of the cover space remains intact. Communication changed a bit, as the series now has multiple subtitles, the most common one being bestsellers. If this was the only case, I would give this version a +1 easily, but since some games have subtitles like family games, which feels irrelevant for representing the series itself, I still think I have to give it a 0 in this category. Lastly, spine and context is a bit of a downgrade. As mentioned before, the console branding now features the dark green of the series, including the one seen on the spine, which in turn makes it stand out even more than the previous design, which, unfortunately, bumps it down to 0 points in this regard. This makes a total of 3 points for the 360's second Classics version, another solid low A rank. Which leaves us with the final Classics version for the 360, a version that followed the entire update of the console's visual identity, with the release of the Slim series and the Kinect accessory. The only thing this version retains from its predecessor is the title, and one of its positions on the top right corner. The visual design opts for a more subdued style, removing the border style and swapping it for a small badge on the front cover. While smaller, its position feels a bit more intrusive, It might also be confused with other visual elements like other types of award badges, sometimes even increasing the amount of visual noise on the cover. It also replaces the white background on the console branding with a soft gray gradient and its text for white instead of green and gray. This combination makes the text of the console's logo hard to read. Another small change is the console's branding on the spine. Besides the previously mentioned color change, it also has a bigger size than the regular covers. While all of this is not enough to give a negative point for design, staying at a reasonable 0, this last point is definitely enough to give a negative point in context. It just doesn't sit right alongside the other covers. Besides these points, the color scheme fits the console style easily, even if badly applied in the design, +1 to color, and another +1 to real estate since it barely covers any part of the regular cover. The now permanent bestseller subtitle also helps cement a positive score in communication, giving a total of 2 points or high B rank for the last Classics version for the Xbox consoles. But we are not done with Xbox. There is one more budget series present on the successor to the 360. This series on the Xbox One comes with a new moniker, Greatest Hits, a title somewhat reminiscent of its direct competition that, like said moniker, gets a positive score in communication. However, when it comes to design, the major question I asked myself when looking at this design, in quotation marks, was how limited does a design need to be until it stops being a factor altogether? And I think this is it. The design has been reduced to a single badge-like element, similar to the badge found on the last Classics version of the 360, and while this obviously gives it a +1 in real estate, it's not much of anything, containing the same problem as the previous design, the obnoxious placement in the front cover, and contains barely any visual elements that gives a series an identity. This is nothing else but a design deserving of a negative point. This new design does come with the added factor of improving the spine and context situation, so a +1 on that front, and the same can be said for the colors chosen. The black with a white to grey gradient fits the console perfectly and gives it a sleek look. And so, even if lacking in design, the final budget series on an Xbox console still lands on a solid low A rank with 3 points. After all, when it comes to budget series covers, it's still better to have a discreet design than something that stands out too much. But it's now time to leave more recent times and do a big leap backwards onto another console, or should I say consoles, with the classic Sega series. This series was released for 3 of Sega's consoles, Master System, Game Gear, and Mega Drive, and it maintains most of its design throughout all versions, with only a small deviation on the Mega Drive, that being the pattern used. The design replaces most of the game box. In some cases, it even replaces the text and images used in the back. I think it's fair to say that just by looking at it, it's one of the worst examples for the design. Total obfuscation of the original cover, an awful choice of color that not only looks drab but fits none of the consoles, the spine looks especially bad, it completely clashes with regular covers. Also, why does the console branding look like it was pasted on top of it? It even gets worse with the Mega Drive, since it doesn't share the visual pattern of regular cases like the others do. And it still, somehow, manages to squeeze the regular cover onto the box, just to remind us of how good we had it. It's negative points all around, except for maybe the title, that gets a 0 at max in terms of communication, which places what would be the last budget series of Sega's consoles in Europe securely on low E rank with -4 points. Finally, it's time to move on to the once major rival of Sega themselves, and the last major player, Nintendo. We start with the first Nintendo budget series, the Nintendo Classics. Fair warning, this is probably the one series that I'm most unfamiliar with, coupled with especially hard to find information online, I wouldn't be too surprised if I got something wrong or missed something completely. So please feel free to correct me in said case. We'll have our first look of the Nintendo Classics with one of the Game Boy versions. This one appears to be another case of a simple design, mostly replacing the original color of the regular box with the series color. On the front cover, we can see a small border and a badge that represents the series, and in this case, a back box that is entirely different with new screenshots and texts that probably more accurately portray the ways the game could be played when the version was released. Still, it is simple and effective. The badge looks charming, and its position isn't very intrusive on the original cover. +1. The color replacing the original box's color is a bright red, and while I'm not a big fan of big bright reds, it would be a failure on my part to not recognize it as an appropriate color, being the main color associated with Nintendo. +1. Since Game Boy boxes don't have a common color, the red also doesn't create a problem when it comes to context and spines either. Another +1. Like other series of similar titles, it gets the same score in regards to communication, 0 points. And finally, when it comes to real estate, the border does occupy a bit of the front cover, which, especially on a small box, obfuscates a bit of the cover art, so I can't reasonably give it more than 0 points, which gives it a total score of 3 points, or low A rank. However, there is another version of this series on the Game Boy. This version does away with the border, and gives us more space for the original art, which warrants it a bump up in points for real estate, and gives us our first high A rank with 4 points. For the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES version, we have more or less the same design, with the border, but now the main colors are yellow and blue, which I believe don't fit much with Nintendo or the NES. Besides this, the placement of the badge is also a bit more intrusive than the Game Boy version. Together, these changes help make this one the inferior version, with a total score of 2 points, or high B rank. To end the Nintendo Classic series, we also have the Super Nintendo version, which also has a slightly different approach. It maintains the bright red, but instead of adding a border, it simply replaces the color of the regular console branding, while also keeping most of the series badge in said branding. You could say whatever you want about the regular design of the box, like maybe not giving the cover art enough space to breathe, but the budget series fits reasonably well with it and keeps the same cover art space. This warrants it a place alongside its Game Boy counterpart on high A rank with 4 points. Now, jumping a bit forward in time, we have what came to be the successor of this series, Nintendo's Player's Choice. In Europe, the first console to get the Player's Choice series was the Nintendo 64. In terms of design, the series mostly maintains the same visual style as the regular cover, and replaces the colors from most faces of the box for the color of the series, leaving only the sides with the original colors. Finally, it adds the series badge on the top corner of the front cover. The first issue with the design is that much of the text, which originally sat on black borders, remains white and is now placed over a new silvery gradient, making it hard to read. The badge also uses a combination of bevels and gradients that make it look a bit tacky. Still, it gets away with a 0 in the visual department due to its somewhat simple nature. However, the biggest problem I have with it is the real estate used, with the cover art being a bit overshadowed by the decently sized border, which then raises a slight difficulty when rating the design in relation to the real estate, since this is already a problem present in the regular cover. This makes it the only exception, so far, where even with the design using the same space as the regular cover, it still manages to get a negative point in this aspect. The color chosen is a neutral choice. I don't think it fits the console itself or the title of the series much, but it still works for the idea of a budget series, 0 points. Speaking of the title of the series, Player's Choice is another name that again very tenuously passes the idea of the requirement for these budget series. So in communication, it gets a 0 as well. In terms of context, it will probably depend on how one stores their games, because from the side it should look perfectly fine alongside regular covers. However, from above, for example, it somewhat pops out since it uses a different color from regular covers, so it gets no more than 0 points. These add to a total of -1 points, or high D rank, making it a weak start for a series that would see its continuation on the next Nintendo console, the GameCube. The GameCube would be presented with two versions, with this being the first one. Let's start with the simple part, the naming. It's the same, so 0 points. The visual style, no other way to say it, but the way the original cover is inserted in the series border with the original branding while being raised by a soft shadow makes it clash so much with the series border that results in a feeling of a cover inside another cover. Not a great look, and while the use of a thinner border is appreciated, it's not enough to raise the negative point this style deserves. It does, however, help give it a 0 in terms of real estate. Color-wise, since the main color actually fits better with the GameCube visual identity, it would receive a better score than the last version, if they hadn't decided to change the color of the title of the series to a bright yellow. I don't get why these companies think bright yellows fit with grays, but whatever, 0 points. When it comes to context and spine, it just doesn't fit alongside regular covers. By being entirely composed of the series color instead of the separation between art and console branding, it creates too big of a contrast, -1 point, which adds up to a total of -2 points for the GameCube's first version, a low D rank. But what about the second version? Does it follow this downward trend? And at first glance, it already looks better. It uses the same color for the console branding, and does away with the shadow. However, it replaces it with a soft gradient, which, while better, it's not much better. But it reduces the border on the front cover to an even smaller size, that's just enough to make a soft transition to the silver case. These small improvements help it go up to 0 points in style and up 1 point in real estate. When it comes to colors chosen, the yellow text now on top of the grey looks even worse. And the only reason why it doesn't bump down the score is because the text is just small enough to make this clash not too big of an issue. So when it comes to the rest of the scores, it remains the same, giving this new revision a total of 0 points, placing it right in the middle alongside the first version of the original Xbox Classics. A decent finale for the series, as it would be the last console in Europe to receive it. And with this, we've finally reached the last series in this video, the last Nintendo budget series, the Nintendo Selects. Released across 3 consoles, the Nintendo Wii was the first to receive this new series. In terms of visual style, it feels closer to the classic series than the previous one, with red being the main color motif, along with the re-addition of a medal-like symbol. It also possesses a border-style shape, but adds a simple gold trim that, coupled with a small ribbon for the badge's positioning, helps sell a more premium look to the game. The series color is also only present on the border in front of the cover, unlike previous series. So, in style, it gets a +1, and in real estate, a solid 0. The colors chosen definitely help the style and are easy on the eyes. The red also makes sense for Nintendo and combines relatively well with the white of the rest of the cover, +1 for color. In terms of spine and context, well, it's exactly the same as regular covers, so it gets a +1. When it comes to the new name, while being a decent name for a series, it, like others, is a bit obtuse at informing the buyer about the requirements for the series, so it gets a 0 in communication, like those others. Which gives this version a total of 3 points, or low A rank. A solid foundation for a series for sure. So solid, in fact, that it would be mostly maintained across all consoles, with very small changes, sometimes to the detriment of the design. On the 3DS, during the initial release of the series, the only visible change would be on the proportion of the ribbon with the medal and title. It's vertically smaller, and forces the text to be smaller as well, which makes it slightly harder to read, but nothing major. Besides this, the only other change would come later on a later version of the series, which adds a small medal to the spine. However, this metal is so innocuous that it doesn't change much in terms of scores. No, the bigger problem actually comes from one of the things that wasn't changed: the proportion of the border. A proportion that was acceptable in a bigger box, but occupies a bit more space than it should on a smaller cover. So, it gets -1 on real estate. The colors work even better, since red is also the color of the 3DS branding, so everything else remains the same in terms of score. This gives both versions on the 3DS a score of 2 points or IB rank. Next, just like the 3DS, the Wii U version would also receive the 2 variations of the spine. But besides this change, the Wii U version would receive no more changes, basically being the same as the Wii one. Unfortunately, the color of the series doesn't really mesh well with the Wii U's main color. Just like the PS4, the red clashes a bit too much with the blue, and just like that case, it gets 0 for color, which gives the Wii U version an inferior score of 2 points, just like its 3DS counterpart. If only they had adapted the color of the series to the console's color, it would at least receive the same score as the original one. Wait, what's this? Oh yeah, the Wii U actually received another variant of the Select series, the Nintendo eShop Selects. And would you look at that, it actually has a color that combines well with the blue. Sure, it might be a coincidence. Orange is the main color of the eShop. That's probably where the choice came from. But it still looks better. So, this small series of 2 games actually manages to give the Wii U a version that receives a score of 3 points and the same rank of low A as the Wii version. This small variant concludes all the budget series I could find across all consoles released in Europe. And now that we've reached the end, let's take a final look at our tier list. On top, with a total of 4 points, we have the Nintendo Classic series, with the variant for the Game Boy, and the Super Nintendo version. And at low bottom, we can see the PSP version of the PlayStation Essential series, right where it belongs. Okay, seriously now, a few of these categories are a bit more subjective than others. A style that might look tacky to me might look alright to you, for example, so take these placements as my opinion on the matter, unless we're talking about the PSP Essentials. In the end, this video was about having a bit of fun looking at some of these covers, and maybe bringing some to knowledge, since this appears to be a topic not very well documented online. So, if you're still here, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to look in the description for the link to the tier list if you also want to do your own top budget series covers. Finally, if you're interested in more information about this topic and the making of this video, I'll be doing a small stream, which I intend to archive, talking more in depth about the small journey of this video. It will probably be linked here at the end of the video. With this, I bid you adieu, and I'll hope to see ya in a future video.